Hey everybody, this is John Fenn with supernaturalhousechurch.org. Once again talking about the discipleship process. And today I'm going to say a little bit more about door number one, door number two, which I did last time. I've had a lot of emails and questions and things like that raised by people who want a little bit more detail. And that is basically the ways that the Lord, the nonverbal ways the Lord speaks to us and leads us, and how I balance out following the Lord's voice and understanding this. Now, what I'm about to share comes from a visitation with the Lord, a teaching visitation from October 1st, 1986. It was the first teaching visitation where I saw the Lord. I was in a village, a mountain village called Laguna de Sanchez in Mexico, which is a couple hours outside of Saltillo. And the Lord appeared to me that night, and actually the interpreter saw him as well briefly for a few minutes. But during that visitation, he taught me, he said, I want to teach you how to hear the Father's voice and how the Father communicates to people. And that teaching changed my life. So he used three particular scriptures that night, and because of the time frame, I've done this many different times in How to Be Led by the Spirit, CD series or MP3, DVD series, different things like that, a little bit in my book, Pursuing the Seasons of God. So this is just the briefest of summaries here to help for those who aren't familiar with me or my teachings or anything like that. But here, I'll just cut to the chase on this. My summary of it is this, and I'll say this ahead of time and then I'll get to what the Lord said, is that your soul is the middle point of a teeter-totter. On the one end over here you have your spirit man, and on the other end you've got your natural senses. And in the middle is your mind. And we do this all the time. If you think about it, you have long searched down with your mind, you've noticed something down in your spirit. Like every single person has said something that we immediately know we should not have said. We may have taken clues in the natural from somebody's facial expression or something to think, oh, that hurt them. But what happens is we notice down on the inside we are grieved, or there is a heaviness on the inside of us, and our mind notices this, and we say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Or when especially the first time or times that a person sins in something, there is that heaviness in there, that dirty feeling, that grievance and everything, and your mind notices what it feels like. So your mind is the middle point of a teeter-totter, and so you weigh out in your mind the natural senses out here, and then you've got your spiritual senses or your inside senses on the inside of you. And so the mind is the middle point of a teeter-totter. And during this visitation, the Lord told me this. He started explaining this. The first example he used was from Luke 8:46. And he was explaining how he was on the way to Jairus' household. And everyone's pushing him and thronging him and everything like that. And then the woman with the hemorrhaging issue touched the hem of his garment. In Luke 8:46, Jesus said, "Who touched me? For I felt power," or I perceived power going out from me. And of course the disciple says, "Everybody's touching you. What are you talking about?" And Jesus said, but he felt that power. He felt that go out of him. Now, what he explained to me in the visitation was that his physical senses, he was aware of everyone jostling, the noise, the sounds, the smells, everything going on with him. But his mind was also focused on the inside. So he was shifting back and forth between natural senses and spirit man's senses, and he felt that power go out of him. The second example he used was from Mark chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. And that is the story of the man who was let down through the roof. And he said to him, as a teaching point, your sins are forgiven. And verse 6 says that there were certain scribes sitting there who were reasoning within themselves. In fact, the same example is used in, the same story is told in Luke chapter 5, verse 22, as well as Mark chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. But they let their friend down through the roof. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. And it says there were scribes sitting there, and they were reasoning within themselves, who does this man think he is? For no man can forgive sins but God. And the King James Version of Mark chapter 2, verse 8, which is what Jesus was teaching me from, because the King James Version has been my Bible core, because most of the commentaries and reference books are based on either the King James or the Revised Version. So, but Jesus used this, and he said, Mark 2:8 says, I perceived in my spirit what they were thinking. And he made it clear. He said, I wasn't reading their minds. And he said, neither did the Father tell me. He said, I perceived in my spirit. He said, I took information in the natural. I saw their body language. I saw the expression on their faces. But then I shifted my attention to the inside, and I perceived in my spirit what they were thinking. And that was so instrumental for me. That was so amazing. He told me, he said, you must live like this. It was a command. It wasn't a suggestion. This, again, was the first of many teaching visitations I've had with the Lord. And he said it right there. He said, you must learn to live like this. You must live like this. And the other example he used was from Acts chapter 14, verses 8 and 9, which was the life of Paul. And Paul's in Lystra. There's a man there from Lystra who was crippled from birth. He'd never walked in his whole life. And it says this in Acts 14, verses 8 and 9. It says that Paul, steadfastly beholding him, perceived he had faith to be healed. And he said to him, stand up. And the man stood up and was whole and went leaping and walking and all that. And what the Lord's point was, he said Paul was talking to many people, but he perceived in his spirit this man. And he said he had to lock eyes on him. He had to steadfastly look at the man to filter out the natural senses so he could concentrate on the inside. And again, Acts 14, 8 and 9 says that Paul perceived he had faith to be healed. And this is one of the things that the Lord said during this visitation. He said, the Bible uses words like perceive, discern, and witness to describe the process in which the mind picks up on what is happening in the spirit. And again, I'll say that, and I've said it many times in my book, everything else. He said, the Bible uses words like perceive, discern, and witness to describe the process in which the mind picks up on what is in the Spirit. These are the nonverbal ways the Father communicates to us, even to his own Son. Jesus perceived in his spirit what the scribes were thinking in Mark 2, 6 through 8, and Luke 5:22. He perceived there was power that had gone out from him when this woman with the hemorrhaging issue, in faith, touched the hem of his garment. And this combination, this teeter-totter action, is something that I do. Now it's second nature. Now it's first nature. I do it on a daily basis. If I'm contemplating whatever I'm contemplating in my daily schedule, I'm praying in the Spirit and I'm thinking about it, but I'm looking down on the inside about how anything that the Father may put there by His Spirit. I do this when I'm in a grocery store and I talk to people. And I try to get a sense. You've done this yourself. You've probably been in a store and you've looked at somebody, which is providing the natural cues. And not a gift of suspicion or something like that. And there is no gift of discerning. There is discerning of spirits, and not guessing. But you looked at a person and you perceived in your spirit, in your mind, you went, wow, there is a real heaviness over them. Or it's like, man, that's a little dark cloud over them. Or you have a couple walk into, maybe you're having a meal or a group meal or something. We can sense it in house church because you're talking small groups and everything. And somebody comes in and you can just feel the spirits of strife around them. And you what happens is you look at them in the natural and everything appears to be okay, but then you suddenly pick up in your spirit, it's like something's not sitting right with them, and you perceive this in your spirit. That's what I'm talking about on a daily basis. I do this on my daily schedule. If I've got a half a dozen things to do, I'm praying in the Spirit. I'm thinking as I'm weighing out, what do I do? I've got item number 1, item number 2, and in my mind I think, okay, I'll drive to this location, then I'll drive to this location, then it's logical to go to this location, and if nothing is interrupted, there's no change in my spirit, then I know that the plans that I make are ordered of the Lord. I expect protection, I expect guidance, I expect good timing, etc. But if I'm thinking I'm going to go do, option number 1, and then I'm going to go to store number 2, and then I'll go to store number 3, and there's just a click there in my spirit, like, don't go to store number 3, then I lay that aside. Or if there's something like, oh, you've got it out of order, you're going to end up doing so-and-so. Or sometimes I'll have somebody come to mind. This is the way I wake up in the morning. I do the same thing with my mind as the middle point of a teeter-totter. Like this morning, it was typical. It's like, Father, do you have anybody you want me to pray for? Immediately, their name just floats up, kind of out of my spirit, and I lay there and I just pray in the Spirit for them. before I get out of bed for a little bit. And a lot of times that's how I do on my prayer list. I've got something like 163 prayer requests or something that people have written in or something like that I go through, to flip through. I've got some on my phone and everything, but I concentrate, especially first thing before I go through the list, I concentrate first thing on those that the Father brings to mind. And so in that way, I'm walking with the Father from the start, from my first waking moment of just, who do you want me to pray for today? And it could be only one or two people before I get out of bed. It could be sometimes 10 or 20, just one after the other. People will go, and it's just making mention of them in the prayer, making mention of them, and that's all that the Father's needing, just that invitation to enter their lives. But that's the way I live, is that my mind is the middle point of a teeter-totter. Over here, I'm looking at my spirit man, and over here, I'm looking at the natural senses, and I'm continually shifting my attention back and forth between how anything that somebody says, something that happens, an email that somebody writes me, a message, whatever the case is, I weigh it out. I first go to my spirit and say, Father, do you have an opinion here? Lord, is there any revelation here? How does this hit my spirit? And I'll know if that's of a right spirit or where they're coming from. I'll have a clue at least. Sometimes, not all the time, but because you use your mind, and it's kind of like you go along in your mind, and then if something gets off of the Lord's knowledge, then He will bring you around and share something to put you back on the path. But otherwise, your plans and everything you just make, and you go along until He corrects you otherwise. So anyway, I'll stop there. I hope that's been a blessing to you. I could end with this. I remember something Lester Summerall said years ago, and he was putting up a shortwave radio, ham radio type stuff, and different stations there. And he made this comment. He said, I don't ask. He said, I've got directions from the Lord. He said, I don't ask the Lord every little thing about opening this TV station or this radio station or anything. He says, I go along and I make my plans, and then He corrects me as I'm making my plans. You have to use your brain first, and then He will correct you accordingly. And I thought that was a good bit of wisdom. So anyway, I didn't intend to share that. I'll end here. God bless. Talk to you next week.